Welcome to Squirrel, the podcast for distracted writers, hosted by Candace J. Thomas and Jody L. Milner.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Squirrel. This is Candace.
This is Jody.
And we are at episode 17. How are you feeling about this, Jody?
Well, when you pitched it, I was feeling all sorts of feelings.
Because it seems like a very scary topic when you throw in politics in fantasy fiction.
It's you getting me back for doing spooky settings. I just know it.
Maybe, but not really. It's such a perfect opportunity since we're picking a new president.
It is
tomorrow.
an election year.
So I really wanted to just, encapsulate this moment that we are living. And I thought we would explore fantasy fiction that both of us write and the different politics, governments, everything. So this might feel like a political episode, and I know you're all so over politics, but promise this one will be fun.
We're going to make politics fun.
It's not painful.
Yeah, sure.
What do I need? What do I mean when I talk about politics in fantasy? Am I talking just government structure or power, magic, religion? Good fantasy usually has some kind of power or government that holds control of the world. And that's really what I wanted to talk about. I thought it'd be just fun to examine some of that in fantasy. And this is a world building really episode.
It is.
And so just how your world functions within that specific kind of government. So first question that I posed to Jody: what do you see as politics when it comes to fantasy?
All right. When I think of politics, I think of power struggles between two groups in general. I mean, that's a vast
That's how you would
generalization,
define
but
it.
that's how I would define the word politics itself. And so in the fantasy realm, it's going to be one group wanting something or wanting the other group not to have something. So one group wants something and wants the other group to not have it. And so maybe in fantasy, this could be one group wanting control over the other or have the power to make the rules that benefit them. And this isn't terribly different than how politics runs in most places. However, we always can pull the magic card in fantasy. And so sometimes those power struggles have to circle around what's going on with the magic in the kingdom. Who has the power magically and who doesn't? Who has the right to use it and who doesn't? And so
there's different classes.
And so you either have different factions of people or different classes of people or different countries or different sections of the population with different powers. Like there's all different ways you can break that up. And so some of the common tropes we'll see in fantasy that will concern politics is like those who have magic versus those who don't, or like the bad king, or my favorite, the misplaced princess. Hello, Princess Bride. She was kidnapped to start a war. That's the whole story.
Right.
Another one is like the rise of the underdog to be the hero of the people. That is a political story.
Yeah.
How about you?
I think a lot about, on the same lines as you, I think a lot about the power that helps create the world. I'm just such a mythology person when it comes to world building. And so I think that the faithful who keep those ideas alive could be the ones that are holding the power. I also like to think about who wants to win and what they can gain from it. If there is an all-powerful king, what are the stakes of losing that power? What safeguards are put in place in order for that king to stay in power? Is there like a rising evil? What would be their agenda in taking over, whatever kingdom? So those are the things that I think about. I think about the stakes of what the government would gain or what the king would gain or whatever. The stakes that the evil versus good wouldn't be. So, yeah.
So your next question is, what is a good power struggle when it comes to crafting a fantasy story?
Yes.
How would you answer that?
well, here we go with mythology. Like, as a mythology creationist, is that correct? Maybe.
I don't know if I've heard it used like
I think
that, but I think we can make it work.
I just coined that. That's what I am. I'm a mythology creationist.
Sure.
And when it comes to my own government and the power struggle, so the magic of the world is, in my mind, the magic of the world is not in control, but it is an enhancement, right? If the magic were in, I'm trying to think of a story where the magic is totally in control. Can you think of one?
It usually doesn't happen only
it's
because
usually like just,
the magic tends to be the plot.
yeah.
Or the person who needs to learn something alongside the magic is the plot.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's what I was thinking, is the ones that have the most power or control of the government are somewhat puppets to people that maybe wield magic, or they're the ones that know exactly how to, I don't know, befriend the people that have that magic, so then they keep them under control. I don't know. Either way would.
And I've
would
seen,
work.
like, there's so many different flavors of how this can work. Because, like, I think when it comes down to it, most fantasy stories are going to come down to some kind of good and evil power struggle.
Right.
It's going to be those who are doing whatever is the ethical choice, the right choice, and then there's going to be those who have a lot to lose if the ethical or right choice is followed. And so who gets to decide what is good and what is bad in these situations? Because remember, everyone is pushing for a goal that they think is right for them.
That's true.
It might not be right ethically, but they feel it's the important thing for them to achieve. And so each side is going to have a goal that they think is right. And all the juicy bits come when these two sides clash. And we're hopefully cheering for the main character and the goal that he wants. But the stronger the goal that the opposing team has, the better the story.
True.
And so if you want it, like, magic can be in this, politics can be in this, a royalty can be in this, mythical creatures can be in this. All of these elements are going to come together to create this power struggle, essentially, between somebody who wants something and somebody else who wants something else, and they're in direct opposition.
How can war then be used in fantasy? I mean, I often think of how, like, Tolkien's whole things was just a war and then other wars, and the.
But if you remember his history, he lived in Europe at the end of World War.
Yeah.
His life was war. And so having that reflected in his story makes a lot of sense. He was so tired of it. So I think having him write wars that end and the good winning was very cleansing for him. Sorry, sidetrack. Squirrel.
No, that's perfect for my point, because I think that war can be part of the fear that propels the story, right? Is that if I think of my favorite fantasy series and where, and there being like an epic war of some sort, and it's fought near the end, right? It's building up to this war, and we're talking like Return of the King, right? The war there is super epic. I mean, you might have squabbles. There's other wars in the other books, but the main one here between good and evil is happening there at that, like, the Citadel. And
yeah, I mean, that's the War of the Five Armies.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
the biggie. I mean, and then the other one in Two Towers, they had the other one that has a different name. But the big one.
I don't think it's the Five Armies. I think you're talking about the Hobbits, because the one in Return of the King isn't the.
Maybe. Remember, it's been quite a hot minute since I've brushed up on my Silmarillion.
I want to make sure that Tolkien loyalists
they're
don't
not going to
come and get us.
Write us all the comments. I dare you. Engagement is good.
No, but that journey that they took to get there was one of the, like, the most incredible parts of it. What fun construction that is, to create the different balances and of creating that war and making it worthwhile. I feel that there needs to be a reward when you have that kind of power struggle. And whether it's being the specific government either wanting power here, or how it's constructed, the army always seems to have is intersected with whatever government they're they have, right? I think there just needs to be a reward at the end of a series when you do that.
Well, yeah, the good guys, or at least people we're rooting for, kind of need to win, or else the reader's going to be, why did I read this?
Or we will be super sad.
There's no sadness.
Yeah.
So all too often, I will see war or the threat of war used as this kind of ambiguous big bad thing. It's a big bad consequence of somebody's failure. And like, readers will have a visceral response to the idea of war because most readers have an idea of what war is and how it's super bad.
I don't like the fact that people die and that people get hurt.
No, nobody
I think
does.
That's the biggest fear, right?
But I find that writing actual war is really, really difficult because that means that the people involved in your story have the power to convince large groups of people to go fight on their behalf.
Have you written a war?
I was going to.
Fantasy?
My trilogy was supposed to end in a big war thing because I was following Tolkien tradition. I'm like, you kind of have to have a big fighting battle climax. And then when I got to it, I'm like, I don't like that because I've read so many really complicated stories that only get more complicated because they have to have this war and somebody has to win. And by the way, writing war itself is just like writing big battle scenes, but add like 300 more people. Like,
yeah, it's not hard. I wrote my whole
when you were writing your big battle
that's
scene.
true.
At the time, you were not enjoying it.
It was
difficult.
You were right because you got to get all those details right.
And you have to have people to cheer for and you have to keep track of everybody.
But you also need to make sacrifices and characters come in play there. Mm-hmm. And that gets really difficult when you have to make those decisions. So,
I mean, if you really want one, you're going to need two nations or two very large groups of people that are already not on good terms, and then a catalyst big enough to set them off.
Yeah.
And start them into fighting. And so, like, if your story is leading itself or lending itself to that, great. War might work to be that really big epic thing that you need. But most stories don't. It feels like I will see new writers be like, ooh, I'm going to have this big war because I did it. I'm going to have this big war because that's what big stories do.
Those are epic fantasies.
And that's the idea of epic fantasy. You have epic stakes.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk more about the government system that we've written. All right. I want to know more about yours.
Like, it feels like most fantasy kind of falls into monarchies. And so I really avoid actually writing about the political system itself because my detail-oriented brain really wants to drill down and making sure everyone has the appropriate title for the appropriate government structure that has the right title. Like, I want to make sure.
So how do you avoid that then? I mean, honestly, when you're world building, how do you create the solid framework for your world if you don't have a good
you have your characters never interact with the politics. And it works with politics and horses. And
but it still needs to be part of your framework.
Like you need to have an aware, like if you have a story that needs to interact with the people running the kingdom itself, then yeah, you need to map it out really carefully. You need to know who they are, what their title is, what their responsibilities are, who their allegiances are to, who they're trying to protect, what their ideals are. Like, there's a lot of questions to answer, and I just didn't want to do any of it because I get tripped up on lots of details.
Understood.
And so I do have a hierarchy system amongst my magic users. It is technically a monarchy because there's a lady who kind of acts like a queen and she has a council. That's as far as I wanted to go. One person kind of in charge and a bunch of people that advise them. And that's as complicated as I wanted to get.
Gotcha.
Does that make for a really good, like a political story? No. But I didn't want that because there's nothing I detest more than stories diving into vast political systems and then it turning into nation versus nation conflict when I wanted a character story.
Agreed. There was so much. Wow, I just really squirreled. There is so much world building when you are creating, specifically with governments, when you're creating a D&D campaign. So there are a lot of nuances when it comes down to that. And I love it when you trip up the DM and just say, we're going to do this. And like, well, I didn't plan that. You can't do that. But there's a lot, like people have a lot of fun creating those governments, specifically with the D&D world or role playing anyway. My series, it has a monarchy who are corrupt by power, right? They're just puppets, and there's an evil demon that actually is running the whole thing. The most fun I had writing a government was with my neo-dystopian with Hawkweed, where it was, I'm taking the structure of communist Russia and putting it into a system of an army. And that was a lot of fun to play with because I needed to follow specific rules that were already in place if I wanted to be faithful, but yet I needed to bend a lot of those rules to make it more science fiction. That was just a whole lot of fun, like a whole lot of fun. And that's one of the things that surprised me. And when you're creating worlds like that, is how you can make something your own. Taking a structure that everyone is familiar with, and then so that what the characters are doing makes sense. You know, that they are given a specific job later on, and that's what they have to go do in their life. But then also having decision be put into play, and how your decisions changed and going against what the government has done, what will happen, what are those consequences look like. And it was so fun to write. So I gotta revisit that world because there's so much more. I spent so much time on that world, and the book is it's just a novella. And what a shame. I really need to go back there. It's really fun and really cool.
I can see that. You got very animated there.
I did. Sorry. Yes.
All right. So it feels like monarchy tends to be the first choice when it comes to a lot of fantasy, like standard classic fantasy books. Monarchies are fairly easy, but what other kinds of governments have you seen or have you played with?
I think that a monarchy sounds like the easiest. Like you just mentioned, that is kind of a standard, but I like the idea of power being a control regardless of a monarchy. So I really became very influenced by the reality of why a town, when I was in Portugal or in Spain, why a town has a church and a castle wall. So the church really was the government power. And if you've been in any of those cathedrals, you feel super insignificant. They are meant to make, like their grandeur is meant to make you feel tiny. And if I think about the villagers and townfolk that went into these cathedrals to pray and to feel small, and they didn't read, they didn't leave their town. I mean, you're talking about these people that like to even travel or to have, a way to travel to a different town. What was the point? Why would you do that? And so they always had a castle wall around them to protect them from being invaded by other people and wanting whatever. I was surprised by the castle walls in the churches, and which is true with anything like in Europe, in old Europe. And it made me go, my world that I live in is so young. there is just no reason to have like castle walls around. But it was eye-opening to me. I didn't even consider the lives of villagers or townsfolk before I started writing fantasy. When they have to travel across big spaces of land or whatever, what would each village look like when they get to it? Would their church be the power that was in that specific town? So that's the other thing that I can think of, is a religion really being the center of what people would find as government.
That's fascinating. So I think of like these epic tomes like Wheel of Time. And most of the government structures are really nestled in these kingdoms and fiefdoms. And so you have kings and you have lords, and you have the powerful people who have to protect the little people. And so that would be why you'd see all of these castles that would dot everywhere, because that would be the lord of the area protecting his people. And you had good lords and you had bad lords. And that's where we get all these like stories like Robin Hood, where you'd had these smaller areas with smaller castles. And if you had a bad lord who was taxing excessively, that would become a problem. So, I mean, in most cases, these are under that monarchy system. But like you were saying, if it's the church in charge, that it's not a monarchy, it's a theocracy.
Yeah, theocracy.
But if it is a select group of people who have taken control for their own selfish reasons, that's an oligarchy.
Ooh.
Which is a really fun word.
That is a fun word.
An oligarchy.
Can I use that for the blog? Because that is...
Steal it. Yeah, go for it.
I'm going to circle it on the notes because that is fun.
Yeah, and that's actually what you were describing when you were talking about your monarchy that had become corrupt by power. And they were puppets under a different control. I mean, that could have been either there's about 70 different types of government. And there's whole lists of these if you want to dive into it on Wikipedia. But there's so many different distinct ways of ruling a people. Like there's a very specific one for when you are on a naval vessel and how the hierarchy of that works. And there's a specific name for that, which I would have loved to remembered for this. But I think, like, for fantasy stories, theocracy can be a really cool choice because in fantasy we've got all these magical powers and gods
mages
and demons and mages and fays, and most of those will be like, that's the religion, that's where the power is, that's a theocracy.
And clerics.
Clerics.
Just thought about
back
that.
to D&D. and so I think going through and just doing some research on these alternative government structures just to shake things up, because I think like monarchies are predictable, but that means they're boring for readers. But if you have something that is just enough different where people are like, oh, I don't know how this works, but this is interesting. Like you get that one more point of your story being different and interesting that puts you ahead of people who chose the boring thing. And we liked being different. Different is good.
Yep. See, this wasn't too painful.
I could have been worse.
Do you have any final thoughts?
So I think like world building is really, really fun. And there's so many different elements of which the government is one. So my finishing thought here is that if your story doesn't really have a lot to do with the government, don't feel like you need to spend a really long time fleshing out all the tiny details of how your government works if you're just not going to interact with them at all. Know the basics, like the really critical bits, like know who's in charge. But other than that, like only feel pressured to figure out what you need to in your story, because there's nothing worse than wasting, an entire week to how's my government work and then not using any of it.
Yeah.
Although knowing it in the background does help you, because sometimes you're like, oh, and they're going to run into the law. Well, what are the law called? What are the guard called? Who's in charge of the guard? Is the guard important in this book, or is it an army? Like, right. These are all questions we run into.
Well, and so my finishing thoughts, basically, I feel that if you're looking at the politics or building a government for your fantasy, it can be intimidating. But I really hope that people have fun, because when you're creating a structure, and depending on how you do it, like with mine, I love using the mythology to structure my government system. And when you do that and you and treat it differently, it's just a lot more fun and it comes to you easier. So I just hope that people have fun building their worlds and building who runs it, and don't be intimidated by it. I mean, yeah, don't hate the politics like we hate our politics, but have fun with them in your fantasy world, because you can do that. So,
all right. What's our listener assignment?
I want you to come up with some some extreme law in your fantasy setting that and think about how it would change your characters if they had to obey a specific law. So,
Okay.
yeah, there you go.
Be very interesting.
Well, they're being oppressed by something. How would that change their storyline or their direction or what they would have to deal with? This is super squirrely. When working in the blood bank, you're like, how does this have to do with fantasy? Working with the blood bank, we have to be on guard with whatever the FDA changes at all times. So if they all of a sudden say, well, we need to change all of your tags to be purple, we have to immediately act on how we're going to make that and implement that specific change. So that's what I mean by this listener question.
All right.
Assignment.
All magic users wear red hats.
Yeah. What would you need to do to change what your people do? So
alrighty. So our next episode is centered on all of you who are participating in some sort of writing challenge right now. And as we'll be entering the second week of November when this episode comes out, we're going to talk about avoiding burnout during writing challenges and some things that might be helpful. So I look forward to that conversation when that happens. If you've enjoyed anything you've heard today, you are more than welcome to come and join our Patreon. We offer occasional reader goodies, and
I think we should get reader input. I really want to send out questions to our readers and get
listeners. Hello,
readers. Oh yeah, to our listeners.
We have been trained.
Scratch that. Yes, I want to send out a lot of questions to our listeners and get some feedback on what you would like to hear us discuss, or if you have anything to share, it'd be fun. We'll have an interactive playground there.
And we have a friend who already wants us to do a marketing episode for authors.
Woo-hoo!
So I can put that in our idea piggy bank.
Okay, we'll do.
All right. If you haven't already, this is a beautiful time to like and subscribe.
Share.
And share, because sharing is caring. All right. This has been a blast. Thanks for bringing this lovely, lovely conversation about kind of about politics.
It's all right.
It's fine.
We do it our way. Not
sure.
Okay. So.
All right. Until later. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Squirrel Podcast for the Distracted Writer with Candace J. Thomas and Jody L. Milner. Please like and subscribe to our podcast for updates and new episodes, and find more information at our website, squirrelpodcast.com. Stay distracted, everyone.
I'm totally not Googling this.
Okay.
It wasn't The Hobbit.
I know it was The Hobbit.
I know. You are so right. Good job. You get a star.
This has to stay in.
I know. I'm leaving it.